Put our hands together as we welcome to the stage Aigboje Aig-Imoukhuede.
Good morning. Thanks for having me this morning, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. There is something about great introductions that make you walk on air or on water. I didn't know whether it was me or somebody else that was being described, but I really appreciate you. So thank you, Carl, and the rest of the team who signed off on having me speak this morning. I want to thank most especially whoever it was who was inspired to nominate or think of me anyway. I don't know who it was and why, but thank you all the same. And to that person, I hope that the next 50 minutes will do justice to your choice. So my name is Aigboje Aig-Imoukhuede. And with that introduction, I don't need to say too much about who I am, other than the fact that I'm going to be 60 this year in September. And this morning, I'm going to speak around what I assume to be the focus of your leadership retreat. I think your leadership retreat, this is me now, and I didn't ask anybody this question. This is me kind of putting myself firmly in the ranks of the MTN team, whether senior, middle, or junior. And my own appreciation of where the organization finds itself at this point in time. And of course, when I see Lead the Shift, leading the shift. I think you want to talk about your institution and you want to talk about yourselves. Those two things and the alignment between those two things on a continuous multi-generational basis is what distinguishes good organizations from great organizations. The alignment between the individual, that's the self, and the institution, that is the collective, and ensuring it endures is the secret between long stories and short stories where organizations are concerned and the individuals between them. So, very quickly, let's start from the individual, since we are speaking about leadership. And there is one thing that characterizes this individual who is in front of you today. Very simply, very early in my life, very, very early in my life, I realized that if you are deemed to be of, let me say, great value, I was going to say inestimable value to others, whether you are short, whether you are tall, whether you stammer, whether you are articulate, whether you are in affinity with the person, it's irrelevant. You become what? Indispensable. And so, that journey that you heard, and if we take it from a professional standpoint, when I started working in 1988 in Chase Continental Merchant Bank at Falomo Roundabout, my youth corps, is a journey where I knew my Bible very well. I didn't really live to it at that time. But certainly the notion of diligence and those who demonstrate diligence and the impact on others, and that they are recognized by who? By who? Exactly. Kings came true to me. So I'm a youth corper in Continental Merchant Bank, a lawyer. And after my first year simply by virtue of the value that I provided as a lawyer to those who were in the institution, from general managers to regional managers to regulators. Remember, a youth corper, forget how intelligent this youth corper was. Forget whatever. The more important and most important thing is the value that was received by those who interacted with this youth corper. As a youth corper, by the time I ended my youth corps, at that time, teams from Continental and IMB were going off to form banks. As a youth corper, the senior managers in Continental who had interacted with this youth corper, who were going off to form banks, came to my boss, who was the head of legal, and said, we want to take this youth corper, and this youth corper should act as our company secretary for a new bank. Now, it's not about the applause. Leave that aside. I'm coming somewhere. It's very important. It's simply this DNA notion within me that I exist to give value to the ecosystem within which I operate. And so, let me relate that to MTN and the organizational reality about alignment between the individual and the institution. Two things make an organization win: your employee value proposition and your customer value proposition. That notion I spoke to you about alignment is about making sure that your employee value proposition is so compelling that it makes those employees deliver something other organizations cannot. And your customer value proposition delivered to the customer is so compelling that your customers are going to pay a premium. That premium may be represented actually in a premium in what is paid, or the premium may come in the form of how much of their share is given to you, even at the same cost. Let's say it's commoditized. Okay? And my employee value proposition search organizationally as a leader is to convince everyone I work with to be just the same way I was as a youth corper in Continental, where, guys, let us make ourselves so important to every person within MTN that we come in contact with, that they say this person cannot leave us. That's the employee value proposition. And the customer value proposition being that our customers feel the same way. And so, this youth corper started life and went to a bank called Prime Merchant Bank, learned many things there, great things, great team. Also, how not to run a bank. And then I went to Guarantee Trust Bank. Fascinating time. Rose very fast. And then was inspired. We'll come round to certain things. Inspired to leave the bank because I wanted to buy my own bank. And because of what I learned in Guarantee Trust about the power of two, I chose not to buy my own bank myself. I convinced Herbert Wigwe, let's go off and buy a bank together. That bank is called Access Bank. The story is in my book called Leaving the Tarmac. And, but let's pause there. I want to come back now to MTN. So you work for one of the most consequential institutions in Nigeria and certainly Africa. Consequential in two main ways. If you go and check the GDP contribution of telecoms to Nigeria's GDP around about let's say 1999. I think it was 4% or less. At the peak of the impact of the telecoms revolution, I think it grew to 17% or thereabouts. It was 4% when our GDP was under $100 billion, and it was 17% when our GDP peaked at $500 billion. But more importantly was that the GSM revolution had probably, arguably, the most important catalytic growth effect on Nigeria's private sector between 2004 and now. I like to think about my contributions or institutional contributions by asking the question, take MTN out of the Nigerian equation and imagine Nigeria without it. So you work for a great institution. So why are you shifting? You work for an institution that is now recorded in the annals of history. In that process, leaders have been made, leaders have emerged. You've fostered so many households of great people, and I'm not talking now about people who work in the company. The children of your employees are going to go on to be great Africans, doing great things. Huge contribution. So why are you shifting? Why are you shifting? Let's think about your organization for a minute. The leadership imperative was about infrastructure at its early days, whether in South Africa or whether in Nigeria. About licenses. About government. About capital formation. And this is what your leaders at the time, and by leaders, I'm not just talking senior people, the entirety of the workforce were grappling with. And obviously, you did it well, much better than most of the 4 people in each country or 4 companies in each country that got a license. And you did it well for 10 years in each of these countries and had to then contend with another set of leadership imperatives around expansion, around national or public sector policy. What tariff structures? How should tariffs work? What is monopoly? What is size? What is consumer protection? And so on. And again, you thrived. Now take note that in it all, country by country, and if I look at Nigeria, I'm sure you would find that the organization faced tests. And you would soul search and you find that the leadership paradigms of one time may not necessarily be the leadership paradigms of this time. And sometimes you find yourselves in uncomfortable places and having to reinvent yourselves. And you better reinvent yourself. Because as each of these phases comes, the ability to reinvent is what determines your relevance as leaders. You are going into another phase now. A phase where many of the things by which you honed your leadership capabilities are relevant but not as pivotal as they used to be. And so the things today are ecosystems, platforms, data, science, partnerships. And again, you are going to have to change and reinvent yourselves if you want to continue to lead. In my career, I have found changing a very interesting thing, and reinventing yourself a very interesting thing. I started my career as a lawyer. I've been a treasurer, a finance controller, I've rolled out branches, I've supervised the public sector, I've operated outside Lagos and in the regional context. I've gone from running or being part of the executive team of Nigeria's most successful bank to being CEO of a bank who at the time, some of our branches were like shrines in Oshogbo, really, until we rebranded them. All the time, having to recognize that this was a different phase, and therefore this needed me to reinvent myself. But in reinventing yourself, does your core purpose and character change? Or should it? The thing that impresses me most about MTN was not the technology you introduced or your ability to roll it out. The thing that impressed me most about MTN was that you established a national, no, dare say, a regional, but I want to experience it from a Nigerian context. A Nigerian brand that represented excellence based on international standards. So let me tell you why that resounds with me. You see, through my career, and if you know anybody that has worked with me for a long time through that career, the one thing that we must share is a determination to prove that Aigboje Aig-Imoukhuede from Sabongida Ora, Onwa local government, Edo State. As I stand, I will show the world that Onwa banker, that Onwa technologist, that Onwa doctor can contribute to the world as much as, if you like, call the other one Elon Musk, call the other one Hewlett Packard, whatever it is, that we from Nigeria, we from Africa, will stand and be respected as global citizens that will provide value at the highest level of diligence and operational excellence. That is my purpose. And so, through that purpose, when people see the type of goals that when we go on a quest, you say, what's the purpose of my foundation? What's the purpose of the ecosystem that operates in? It's actually this. I want to close the gap between Africa and the rest of the world. Nothing else. And I'm not pulling back from it. It's not, if you say it's, too lofty, that is my goal. That at the end of the day, you will point to things where, as a result of our contributions, collectively, individually, we have closed the gap between Africa and the rest of the world. However many millimeters that counts for. That's what thrills me. That's what keeps me going. That's what I'm looking for. And so, when you think about yourselves, and then that question I asked, why are we here? MTN Nigeria is operating well. The question certainly is not your performance today. It is fitness for tomorrow. Fitness for tomorrow, particularly in the context of this lofty hurdle that I have recognized you as representing, as an organization that shows, as an organization that shows that Africans can lead, and I'm not saying just Carl, I'm saying even your entry-level staff can lead with the same quality and output as the most admired individual in Tokyo, in London, in Sydney, or anywhere else in the world. So, what type of thing does this require from the individual? When do you know that you are leading? When leadership costs you comfort. When leadership slows you down. When leadership forces you to explain hard things to good people. These three things, certainly you have come across, every single person in this room. The question is, the tests of leadership that I've just described, how do you respond to them? That is what this retreat is all about. I don't think, given the intelligence I know is in this room, it's an awareness of what leadership is, or rather a lack of awareness of what it is. What you are all about is how do we respond to our reality as leaders. I want to ask you a question. Think about the most important decisions you've taken in the last 3 years. Who did they upset? Whose performance did it reduce? And whose scrutiny did it invite? If your decisions are not touching on the things I've just spoken about, you are not leading. Or let me put it this way. You are avoiding the things that call for leadership. Leadership is not when you are leading 4-0, the game is in cruise control, and there's nothing to worry about. Leadership is when you are losing 4-0, you are leading 4-0 rather, and you have the realization that, the way my team is playing, if we're not careful, it's going to be 1-4 soon, 2-4 soon, 3-4 soon, 4-4 soon. Or the way my team is playing is that we are going to win this game 4-0 and we are going to lose the next game. Leadership is never about the easy things. Never. You don't need leaders for the easy things. Culture. Certainly, MTN is a case study in culture. And if I look at it in a Nigerian context, whenever an organization did not exist and comes to exist in an environment, has the effect that MTN has had on a country, obviously the culture is going to be very visible to the whole world. So if I ask people to describe your culture, many Nigerians can. But let me tell you what your culture is. Your culture is simply what your leaders tolerate. It's not the 10 Commandments. If you remember that story, Moses coming down with the 10 Commandments and then doing what with it? Smashing it. Now, smashing it was not an act to say we are not using these 10 Commandments anymore. It was a realization in 10 PowerPoint points, right? On screensavers and so on. That's not culture. So if you tolerate people killing each other, very quickly, all right, people will start killing each other. So your culture is what you tolerate. Let me tell you something that I have found. People follow leaders in ways that it's incredible. People will follow. When I say follow, people will behave like leaders in ways that are incredible. So look at the positive of that. If you want a certain behavior in your company, leaders just behave that way. I have tried to live my life of leadership in a way where the individual that stands in front of you, everything that the individual says, if you have the power to examine what that person does, they are in alignment. And so, I like to admit my mistakes publicly. I like to admit my weaknesses publicly. You know why? So that when you say, but you did this, I say, no be me tell you, say, so I be. And it's better for us to understand what our weaknesses are and work together to eliminate them or improve them, than for me to stand here and say, you know what, I'm perfect. Or I want you to be perfect. When we know that is not at all the case. And so, one of the greatest points of leadership is what I call the personal journey. The readiness to say, okay, this is what I want to be. This is who I am today. Just in the same way as the organization. Remember I told you about alignment between the institution and the organization. This is who we are today, and this is what we want to be. And so in 2002, when we said this is what Access Bank will be, we didn't say it from a position of arrogance, and when I say we said, we were like position 70 out of 90 banks. And we said, I remember once actually, in an audience like this, Tayo Aderonko and Jimovia were sitting together, and we were in London. And I said one day, Access Bank is not going to be any different from Zenith or GT. They laughed. Wow! The whole audience laughed. I said, calm down. I didn't say today. I said one day. And interestingly, in Paris, Zenith Bank was launching, was doing their introduction to the city of Paris when they opened their bank in Paris. And Jim asked me to attend, which I did. It's a great day for them. And I said, in 2007, Jimovia welcomed me to London when Access UK opened shop in London. It's interesting that less than 10 years or something like that, but I'm welcoming to Paris, just as he welcomed me once in London. And you see that story I told you about one day. Okay. Bear that in mind with respect to some of your competition today. I admire MTN for governance, but governance is not compliance. Governance and risk management are the things that ensure that you survive, that you continue, that you endure. So what is different between, this is now where I think there's a lot of affinity uniquely between MTN and Access. Most African institutions, certainly most Nigerian institutions, feel that growth, and what I mean is hyper-growth and governance, are difficult to maintain at the same time. And so most do not try to do it. I say to that, there's a way there's something that one of our languages says, tufiakwa. I feel that any institution that seeks scale without ensuring that inbuilt into that scale is governance and risk management is setting itself up for the big explosion that always comes. But it's very difficult to do. And so if there's one thing that distinguishes Access Bank, and I speak to those foundations as CEO I laid, was that whatever speed of growth that we are moving at, we will not compromise governance, we will not compromise risk management. Simple. And let me tell you something. That is what distinguishes great organizations from what you would call shooting stars. I have no interest in shooting stars. I have only interest in multi-generational stories. My story of leadership will not be told whilst I'm alive. My story of leadership will be told 10 generations from now. And not by it once was, but by those who are in the institutions that were created 10 generations ago. And I pray that is MTN's story. Do you know why? A nation's development, a nation's advancement comes from multi-generational layers within the same ecosystem. Each time you create a company or a society, by society I mean club, university, and so on, and it dies after the first 1 or 2 generations, you are creating a stunted society. Great societies are societies where on the shoulder of each generation stands a new one. And that is how you grow. But if each time you emerge, it stops there, that is the extent of your society. You will simply be a one-generational society repeating itself. That has been Nigeria's problem. And so, legacy, multi-generational legacy, is of fundamental importance to me. So for MTN, and particularly this shift that we are talking about, the world in itself has been characterized by the acronym VUCA. Okay? Volatile, complex, ambiguous, and what was the last one? Okay. Uncertain. And of course, when you put on CNN today, it's proven. You don't need to think too hard about that. I don't know if this world is going to be won by those who can forecast. I don't think so, because with everything that happens every next month, I'm yet to find the person who forecasted it all. I think it's going to be built by those who are ready for any set of circumstances. Are you leaders who are ready for any set of circumstances? These are the questions that you are going to have to answer over the course of this retreat. I want to round up with the telco versus technology mindset, because I see my timer. Telco mindset: project infrastructure, managing regulators, optimizing utilization, avoiding disruption. Technology mindset: build platforms, experiment responsibly, use data to decide, move before certainty. That's some shift. Because you've become very good at the telco mindset. A market leader, a market champion with the telco mindset. And you have many of the things that the technology business envy. You have distribution, you have brand trust, you have customer access, you have national relevance. You have the ambition. But even as my time is up, you face the challenge I faced when I said, I don't want to do banking anymore. And I retired from banking. And when I was asked to describe what I was doing, I used the term retire, because I didn't want anybody to associate my thinking mindset anymore with banking. I wanted to decouple myself from banking. I wanted to reinvent my new reality. And that doesn't mean that banking is not relevant. That doesn't mean that I don't own banks. That doesn't mean that I am not a part of banking. It means that I recognize in 2013 that the banking relevance that I lived in, the days and times of my banker and me competing as a banker, needed reinvention. I wanted to be a technologist. I wanted to be an asset manager. I wanted to be a builder of real infrastructure and real assets, because that is what this time in Nigeria and Africa are calling for. And so I went back to school. You heard And I sat in a classroom of people your age, whilst this Agbalagba, and they were asking, what am I doing in this class? What do I need this for? Why do I need to understand about platforms and ecosystems and so on? And I went around the world for 2 years, and I spent time with asset managers, and I spent time with venture builders to learn and adjust. Your time to pivot is now. You recognize it. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to give my suggestions as to how you go about it. But clearly, you guys, you have to quickly determine your plan for the new today. Thank you.
Can we have a big round of applause? A big round of applause.